And I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker of the day, Jose Perea, who's going to talk about quasi-periodicity and persistent Kunneth theorems.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Rick, for putting this together. So the talk today is going to be about sort of the study of time series, and in particular, the topological view of studying time series data. So there is a lot of sort of scientific problems where the thing that you want to study, varies with time, and topology doesn't seem to be the first thing that comes to mind when you want to study data like this. So I like these type of examples because they show that one can turn some problems with a little bit of creativity and finesse into questions that one can study with topological ideas. So that's sort of the main message and something I hope we can do more of. So the typical technique we use in topological time series analysis is the sliding window embedding or the time delay embedding. So the way it works is you start with your time series. So let's say that is given by a function f. In this picture, it is valued in the real numbers, but it can have values in any metric space. And we choose two parameters: the step or the delay. So tau is going to be a positive real number, and the embedding dimension that is controlled by an integer d. So what do? We take for each t in the domain of f, we then evaluate the function at the time points t plus tau, t plus 2 tau, and all the way up to t plus d tau, and we put them all in a vector. So again, if this is in, with values in the real numbers, then this would be a point in Rd plus 1. But if you are taking values in any other metric space, then this would be something in the d plus 1 Cartesian product of the metric space. So the reason why this is called sliding windows is because this vector is essentially discretizing the window, the graph that lies in the window between t and t plus d tau. And sliding the window means varying t. So when you do that, you get sort of a point cloud in your sort of high dimensional observation space. And the main thing that we have leveraged is that several properties of the original time series or the original function are reflected in the shape of the point cloud that you get by varying t, by sliding the window. For example, if your function is periodic, then when you apply the sliding window, you get something that resembles a circle. And when you apply persistent homology, and in particular, you get the barcodes, for example, in dimension 1, then you can use the barcode as features for example, periodicity detection or recurrence detection. And other sort of nuances of the time series are also reflected in the barcode or the persistence diagram. And that has been essentially the object of study over the last few years in these topological time series analysis. Sort of the first paper where we sort of thought seriously about the theory behind this construction that I just described came out, 6 years ago now, in FOCM. And this was a paper with John Hare. And essentially, we just took a very serious approach to understanding the pipeline time series, sliding window embedding, persistent homology, specifically for L2 periodic functions F. And we learned several things. We learned that, for example, if your sample, I don't think here I meant sample size. I think here I meant harmonics. That if your function F has, say, n sort of fundamental harmonics or very strong harmonics, then you want to make your D be sort of 2n or at least 2n. And if L is the number of periods, then a good choice of tau is this quantity. This resembles like a Nyquist sampling type of theorem where you want your dimension somehow to reflect twice the frequency content. Something else that we learned is that if you want persistence not to depend too much on the field of coefficients, then you want to take coefficients in a field, let's say Z mod P, for P greater than the dimension, the embedding dimension for the sliding window embedding. And with a little bit of care, we showed that in several examples, we got sort of ways of measuring recurrence, which were shape agnostic, meaning that they worked equally well for sort of complicated signals or sort of simpler signals like sine and cosine. And that if you normalize each point in the sliding window point cloud, then you can make this resistant to dampening, which happens a lot in biological data. And actually, the first example we tried was essentially there in biological clocks. So the goal was, take an organism like humans or rodents, and you want to understand the different sort of biological clocks that are present in the organisms. I think the circadian clock or maybe the cell cycle, and you want to do that at the genetic level. Okay, so that work came in these papers, Swiper's sliding windows and one persistent scoring. And the setup of the paper was as follows. Biologists would give you data sets that look like this. Each row would represent a particular gene that they were studying, and each column would represent a time point. Okay, so what they did is they would take a cohort of rats, of mice, and they would synchronize their circadian clocks through putting light on them and then sort of put them in the dark. So they would synchronize the circadian clock of these mice. And then every hour they would take a mouse, they would take a piece of tissue from the liver, and they would do a gene sequencing panel. And that would give you a column in this data set. And they would just do that every hour. And you would get sort of this time series of gene expression levels. And what the biologists wanted to know was, can you identify genes that are expressed in a periodic fashion? Okay. And of course, they won't tell you what periodic means. They just want it to look recurrent. But here is what happens when we apply this idea of sliding windows and persistence. So we take, again, each gene, each row in this data set. We apply the idea of sliding windows, so we get a point cloud. Then we apply persistent homology to that point cloud and use the longest bar in dimension 1 as a quantifier for periodicity or recurrence. And we just order from, let's say, more periodic to less periodic according to persistence. And what I'm showing you here are the top, let's say, 8 genes according to persistence. And of course, when you look at them, yes, they look very repetitive. When you look at the bottom of the ranking, you get genes that look like this, that of course don't have any sort of repetition or information to them. And what turned out to be the case was that if we compared sort of the types of genes that we found in sort of several systems, for example, the yeast metabolic cycle, we found genes that were very much periodic, but that if you try to find them with other standard methods, other sort of state-of-the-art methods at the time, you would lose them. You would not be able to find them in the top of the ranking. And these were methods like the Lichtenberg. The Lichtenberg is a sort of Fourier-based method. Sorry, this is like the Lichtenberg is like an autocorrelation type method. Lomskargel is so this is a periodogram. This is like a frequency-based method. And again, what we saw was that sort of each method had sort of its biases and things that they thought should be periodic. Like if you look like a cosine, you were very periodic. But something like this still very repetitive and important in the organism. Okay, so that was sort of a very first sort of proof of concept. It worked quite well. And then other scientists just took the idea and ran with it in very, very interesting applications. So for example, the people at Edgar Lobaton's lab in NC State took these sort of similar ideas to do classification of movement using motion capture sensors. So here's the setup. They take an individual and they put sort of motion capture sensors in the joints. And they essentially put them through several behaviors, biking, golfing, running. And then what they get are these time series from each one of the sensors. And you get them in sort of in the 3D dimensions. And then what they do is they take sort of the sliding window embedding for each one of the channels. They get these point clouds through sort of smart subsampling so that they can do this in real time. They get a point cloud and then compute persistence diagrams, and then use the persistence diagram as a feature of the movement as captured by the sensors. And then what they saw was that, you know, the persistence diagrams, the point clouds in particular, the persistence diagrams that you get depending on the different movements generate sort of very different signatures. So when you go ahead and classify movement by diagrams, you get fairly high classification accuracies and even sort of very nice clustering when you try to visualize them. Okay. So we've seen an application to biology where we found periodic genes that biologists are interested in. We also saw this application to sort of behavior analysis or using motion sensors. Here's another application. This is by Hamid Karim's group, but also at NC State. So they do this, the application they showed was to the detection of wheezing. So wheezing is a noise that people make when they are breathing if they have you know, pulmonary problems. So essentially what you get is sort of time series that look like this. And what they showed is that using, again, sound signals of people wheezing, you know, passed through sliding window embeddings in persistent homology, you can get classification accuracies, you know, upwards of 98%. So this marriage of time series, delay embeddings, and persistent homology, again, you know, has shown to be very powerful in analyzing, you know, real valued time series. I think this is the last demo I'm going to start with, but beyond real valued time series, videos. Sorry, there seems to be a question. Yes, William is asking, I have a question about these human body movement detection results. Can the technique distinguish walking from running? My guess is that yes, because if you use the same window size, the frequency will be different. So let's see if they had that. I don't think they had those two behaviors in the database, but my guess from knowing what the method does is yes, William. Okay, so the next application is to the analysis of videos, right? So I said that, you know, when thinking about sliding windows, your time series can be valued in any metric space. In particular, it can be valued in the metric space of images. So a video is nothing but a time series of images. So what you can do is you can take, you know, this video and you can compute its sliding window embedding. And here, for example, is our visualization using PCA into 2 dimensions of what the sliding window embedding looks like for this video. Again, we're just taking each frame and we're just concatenating them in a giant vector, and that is the sliding window. And the goal is to try to understand properties of that set. So here is a collection of videos we took from the internet. You know, some of them had repetitive behavior, some of them didn't, and we did the following experiment. We went to Amazon. So Amazon has this very cool service called Amazon Mechanical Turk, in which you can pay humans to do classification tasks. So we took a bunch of those videos that you saw, we put them on the internet through Amazon Mechanical Turk, and we asked a ton of volunteers to do the following task. The interface was essentially what I'm showing you here. So we showed them 2 videos, and then the human had to say, you know, I think video A is more repetitive than video B, okay? So we did that for a ton of videos, a ton of pairs, a ton of humans. And from that, we got a ranking of sort of the most periodic video to the least periodic video according to humans. So humans are supposed to be the gold standard in perception tasks. Most of the time that is true. And what we saw was that when we compared sort of periodicity detection using the human ranking to standard sort of state-of-the-art methods in computer vision and topology, the sliding window method, what we saw was that sliding windows in topology was much closer to what humans thought was recurrent to what other sort of computer vision techniques thought was recurrent. Okay, so, yeah.
Sorry, is that a negative correlation between human labeling and the Cutler-Davis frequency?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to bash them. That's just what the computer gave us.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so, right, so periodicity detection, so that was cool, and we saw sort of a ton of applications with that. But here's something interesting that geometry can give you that is hard to see through other sort of more, so let's say like frequency analysis or something like that. So here are two time series, cosine of t and cosine of 3t. Of course, this function is periodic. And here is another function, cosine of t plus cosine of pi t. This function is not periodic because the frequencies are not related via rational numbers. However, when you look at the Fourier spectrum, in particular the power spectral density, these look very similar, in terms of the sort of density and spectral information. However, when you look at the sliding window embedding, since this function is periodic, of course the sliding window embedding is going to be a circle, and when you compute persistence, of course, you're going to see that sort of a very strong one-dimensional feature. The interesting thing is that when you take the second function and you compute its sliding window embedding, what turns out to be the case is that it fills out this two-dimensional torus. And when you compute persistence, lo and behold, it is so very clearly indicated in the persistence diagram. The thing to note is that in computers, everything is rational. So even though I'm typing here pi with LaTeX, for the computer, everything is rational. But the point is that the rational approximation in the computer is sort of close enough to give you something that looks like an irrational winding of the torus. And the cool thing is that not only can you do this at the level of real value time series, but here's a video of two oscillators. And the way we designed it was for the frequencies to be non-commensurate, meaning linearly independent over the rationals. So when you compute, again, the sliding window embedding of this time series, and you look at the persistence diagram, you clearly see that you have toroidal or quasi-periodic information in the time series. So this will be something very hard to see even to the humans that are supposed to be the gold standard in perception. So we took this sort of early confirmation and we applied it to videos of vocal folds. So we went to the people at the speech lab at Michigan State, and they had this database of videos. And the way the videos were acquired were, they took a volunteer, they put a camera through the volunteer's nose, and then made a recording, a high-speed recording of the vocal folds opening and closing, as they said, for example, ah. So for a normal person, you get a sliding window embedding that looks like a circle, and that is very clearly demonstrated in the persistence diagram. But for other conditions, for example, like biphonation, what you get is something that resembles a torus instead, because you have the vocal folds vibrating sort of clashing frequencies, and that is sort of demonstrated again in the persistence diagram. So again, we took this sort of very interesting database, and what we saw was that, again, by applying sliding windows and persistence detection, we can localize sort of normal behavior and these sort of abhorrent behavior automatically, right? So what people in the speech science community would do is they would look at the video, they would maybe hire a couple grad students, and the grad students would so, manually sort of delineate the vocal folds, and then they perhaps, would derive one-dimensional surrogates, and then try to analyze the one-dimensional surrogates. A lot of work, a lot of grad student hours. And then I guess what this example shows is that sort of just by using this idea of sliding windows and persistence, you can just go ahead and automatically sort of identify these types of behaviors. Okay, so this was a 20-minute introduction, but hopefully I convinced you that studying sort of the pipeline from time series to sliding windows to persistent homology is an interesting problem. The case of periodic functions is essentially solved. I mean, that's what we did with John 6 years ago. But here in this paper that just came out maybe a month ago with my student Hitesh Kakar, we're sort of starting to analyze the case of time series whose sliding window produces tori. And this is what we call, or what is called, quasi-periodic functions. So what is the setup? So the setup is a function, let's say from the real numbers to the complex numbers, is quasi-periodic if you can write it in the following form. So you write it as an infinite, as an infinite series that resembles maybe like a Fourier series. The only difference is that the index in set is 0 to the n, and then the frequency components are these inner products between the integer vector k, and then this omega is a vector of frequencies, omega 1 through omega n. And what we're going to require is for them to be linearly independent over the rationals. And then the coefficients can be computed through these limit. Okay, so one can show that this is sort of the right thing to do. So that's a quasi-periodic function. It's a function that is a superposition of oscillators so that the frequencies are incommensurate, essentially. The main goal of the paper and a lot of the work that came after this was very simple, right? We just want to understand this, the persistent homology of the Ritz filtration on the sliding window point cloud. And by understand, I mean, like really get a hold of, how do the bars depend on the field? How do they depend on the dimension D? How do they depend on tau, the delay parameter? How do they depend on F, right? Because, I showed you a ton of applications, but one of the sort of hard steps is to actually, sort of articulate why the results are not random noise. You know what I mean? Like you want to get some results and then say, yeah, we expected that if your recurrence was of this form, then the persistence diagram should be of this other form. And that can only be achieved, I believe, by just studying these types of objects seriously. So what is the strategy? The strategy is actually very simple. Is take your quasi-periodic function f, little f, approximated by a finite trigonometric polynomial like this, and remember that the sliding window embedding of little f is this vector. And if you just apply this construction to the trigonometric polynomial, then maybe trigonometric series, you get sort of these type of decomposition, right? So you get on the one hand this vector of exponentials, and on the other hand these coefficients of that come from the Fourier decomposition. You can further write this out as this sort of vector matrix multiplication expression, and this is going to be crucial, right? Because the matrix on the left, hopefully the people that know a little bit about signal processing will immediately recognize this as a Vandermonde matrix. And if you look at the thing on the right, the vector, this very clearly, maybe not very clearly, but this looks like maybe like an irrational winding of a torus, right? So that's essentially what we try to understand, right? We take the sliding window point cloud, we write it as this matrix times this curve. The matrix on the left is the Vandermonde matrix on those nodes. That is, those types of matrices are fairly well understood in the computational mathematics and harmonic analysis literature. And then the curve on the right turns out to be dense in an N torus if the frequency vectors are linearly independent. This is Kroneker's approximation theorem, if you know what that is. Okay, so the main goal or the main strategy to understand the persistent homology of the sliding window point cloud is to understand the persistent homology of the curve X of this torus winding. And then we just pass whatever we understand about the persistent homology of X through the van der Monde matrix, and hopefully we can derive theorems about the persistent homology of the sliding window point cloud. So here's an example. Take F to be e to the IT, e to the I square root of t, and e to the I square 3t. So 3 linearly independent frequencies. If you compute the Fourier transform, the FFT, and then you look at the peaks in the spectrum, you will look at that the locations are roughly those of the frequencies. Again, everything is rational, so these are just sort of approximations. So what the theory tells us is that you want to choose your D, the thing that controls the embedding dimension D+1. You want that to be the number of peaks in the spectrum, okay? The number of prominent peaks in the spectrum. So we have 3 peaks, so we make D equal to 3. The question, how do you choose tau in the sliding window embedding? And this is an important choice because here is what happens to the persistent homology for 2 choices of tau, right? So same D equals 3. And on the left, you have this value of tau, on the right, this other value of tau. And hopefully what you can notice is that the persistence diagrams are completely different. On the right, we have the signature of what we would expect to see, a 3 torus, because we have 3 independent frequencies, right? So 3 generators in dimension 1, and then 2 generators in dimension 2, or 3 generators in dimension 2, maybe one is hidden, but those generators are completely hidden, completely obscured in the picture on the left. So what this says is that the choice of tau really is important. You really need to know how to make it. So here is sort of a wider view of this phenomenon. So what I'm plotting here is how the persistence of the top 3 features in dimension 1 changes with your choice of tau, okay? So again, the dark blue is the persistence of the most persistent feature in dimension 1. Purple is the second most persistent. Third is the third most blue is the third most persistent. And I'm just recording how the persistence changes as you vary tau. Okay, and the 2 sort of vertical lines are the 2 taus that I showed you a slide ago. The one on the left was the one that obscured all the features. The one on the right was the one that really brought the features forward. Here is what happens in dimension 2. So same idea, I take the 3 most persistent classes in dimension 2, and I look at the persistence and then vary tau. And hopefully what you can see is that this tau star that I call the optimal tau really is the one that, jointly maximizes persistence in dimension 1 and dimension 2. So this is the one that you want to choose. Yeah, you don't want to be in the 16.45 case. So why do I call this optimal? More, beyond the fact that it's sort of maximizing persistence nicely, is because it is actually it's a local minimizer of this weird expression. So what this expression is doing is promoting orthogonality between the columns of the van der Monde matrix. So essentially what we did was, a priori we said, we want this matrix to be, as close to an isometry or as close to a multiple of an isometry as possible. And this expression guarantees, or at least promotes that. And choosing tau in this way was actually how we found it first, right? So we solved this optimization problem. It's a very simple optimization problem. And once we found it, we looked at the rest of the persistent homology, and what we found was that optimal tau really was the one that, or at least one of the ones that you want to choose. So that's the recipe. That's the recipe that we work out in the paper. We say, you know, if you have a quasi-periodic function, you want your dimension to be controlled by the number of prominent peaks, and you want your tau to be a minimizer of this very simple expression that depends only on the location of the peaks that you find with FFT or some approximation of that. Okay, so we're at the 30-minute mark. Are there any questions that I can answer at this time? Okay, if not, then let me tell you what we want to do next. So far, I've told you two things. I've told you that sliding windows and persistence is a powerful combination. The second thing I told you was that, you know, quasi-periodicity is sort of this interesting toroidal sort of type of behavior, and that one can, doing a little bit of, you know, harmonic analysis, you can figure out sort of good choices for the parameters that control the sliding window embedding. The next thing I want to do is I actually want to prove theorems about the persistent homology, you know, once you make these good choices. Okay, so this is a torus, right? And if you want to understand the persistent homology of a torus, what should you do? Well, you should understand the persistent homology of a circle. And that is already done by Henry Adams and Michael Adamaszek. So they have a very clear theorem stating what the persistent homology of the Ripps filtration on the torus is. Okay, great. So now, once you know the persistent homology of the circle, what do you do next? What do you do next? Well, you prove a Kunneth theorem for persistence, right? So this is actually what motivated, actually the work on quasi-periodicity analysis was the thing that motivated our studying Kunneth theorems in persistent homology. This was just a step, you know, sort of world domination plan. So what is the persistent Kunneth theorem? So if you go back to your sort of algebraic topology courses, you will remember that if you take two objects in the category of topological spaces, say X and Y, and R is a PAD, then you can take the topological product of those two topological spaces. You can take the homology of it. And what the Kunneth theorem says in homology, at least like a very simple version of it, it says that the homology of the product fits into a sort of a short exact sequence, where the first term is the tensor product over R of the homology of the terms. And then the other term is the tor of the homology of the terms, but with a degree 1 shift. So you have this short exact sequence. The short exact sequence splits, but the splitting cannot be chosen to be natural. Okay, so that is the traditional topological Kunneth theorem that we all hopefully know and love. So the question that we sort of face now is, okay, let's replace X and Y. They're not topological spaces anymore, but they're filtered topological spaces. So let's say that you take two objects, X and Y, in the category of filtered topological spaces. So the first question is, what are useful ways of filtering the product? Okay, so you can take the product of X and Y. What is a good filtration for it? The second question is, what are formulas for the barcodes of the sort of filtered product once you choose a filtration? What are formulas for the barcodes in terms of the barcodes of X and the barcodes of Y? Okay, so answering these two questions is what we call a persistent Kunneth theorem. You know, giving you a filtration of the product and then figuring out the barcodes of the product in terms of the barcodes of the factor. So how do you filter the product of X and Y? So here's an example that hopefully motivates a filtration. So say that X and Y are CW complexes, so objects in the category CW. And a filtration that comes built in is the skeletal filtration, right? So the 0 skeleton inside the 1 skeleton and so on. If X and Y are, let's say, if one of them is like a finite CW complex, then the product can also be given, the topological product can also be given the structure of a CW complex, and the end cells are the products of cells whose dimension adds up to n in this case. So the n skeleton is the union of all these products over cells whose dimension adds up to something less than or equal to n. Another way to write this is that the n skeleton of the topological product is the union of the products of the I and j skeleton for I plus j equal to n, okay? So this is what happens in CW complexes. So hopefully this is a reasonable filtration to you. And I mean, it is to us. So we're gonna use it. We're gonna use the motivation of CW complexes to define the tensor product filtration. So what is the tensor product filtration? If you take two objects in the category of filtered topological spaces, X and Y, then their tensor product is the filtration that on degree n has the topological product xy cross yj, take the union over those, and I plus j equal to n. Okay, so if you're a visual person, this is what's happening. You know, here's the filtration of x in the x-axis, the filtration of y on the y-axis, and the filtration of the product is essentially the union over the anti-diagonals. Okay, this is actually an old filtration. You know, some people call it the tensor product of filtered spaces, the standard filtration, the product filtration. You know, we're just gonna call it the tensor product filtration. And again, the motivation comes from CW complexes. Here's another example. So take the Rips complex, which we have seen many, many times over the last few days. So again, at degree epsilon or scale epsilon is the collection of finite subsets of X whose diameter is less than epsilon. So here's a metric we can put on the product of X and Y. We can put the maximum metric, right? And then here is a very nice result. It turns out that the geometric realization of the Rips complex of X and Y, X times Y at scale epsilon, is naturally homomorphic to the product of the geometric realizations. So this is a persistent statement, right? That the filtration you get from the product is sort of the product of these two filtrations, but you take products in the same degrees, as opposed to complementary degrees as we did before. So this motivates this other filtration. You know, if you have two filtered spaces, X and Y, then we're gonna define what we call the categorical product filtration as X times Y is equal to Xn times Yn, right? So we're only taking the diagonal now. So those are the two filtrations that we're gonna focus on. The tensor product filtration, right? Which is, again, motivated by CW complexes, and the categorical product, which was motivated by Rips complexes, but actually turns out to be the actual categorical product in the category of filtered topological spaces, meaning that it satisfies the typical universal property. So just as an illustration of the two filtrations, here is a filtration of a circle, of a simplicial circle. Very, very simple. Here is the tensor product filtration of the product, right? So if you take two circles, you take their product, you get a torus, and here's how the torus is filtered. The numbers are supposed to indicate the degree at which you include the simplex, okay? So all the zero simplex, so the AA simplex, zero simplex is included at degree 0, the zero simplex BE is included at degree 1, and so on. Here is the categorical filtration. And you see, again, the numbers represent the degree at which you include the simplex. Just to remind you, the degree of a simplex is the sum of the degrees of the terms. And in the tensor product filtration, sorry, in the categorical filtration, the degree of a simplex is the degree of the terms because you take the same one, xn times yn. So here are the barcodes of the two filtrations. And the thing to notice is that the tensor product filtration is a little bit noisier than the the one of the categorical product filtration. And this will be clear in a moment as to why. Okay. So let's start with the categorical product, which is again the simpler of the two. In degree n, the filtration has xn times yn. Okay, so if you just apply the Kunneth theorem, the usual, algebraic topology 1 Kunneth theorem, then we get the following short exact sequence. You get a 0 here because we're taking homology with a field. So this is just sorry, the tor term is the one that goes away because we're taking homology with coefficients in a field. And then in order to analyze the persistent homology of this guy, what do? Well, you take direct sum over n, and you get the persistent homology of x times y. So I'm going to do that again. So if you just take one degree at a time, you get the Kunneth formula for that degree. And if you now take the direct sum over the filtration degrees, you get this isomorphism between the persistent homology of the categorical product filtration and this persistence module. And this is an isomorphism over the polynomial over the polynomial ring ft. So just by doing this very, very simple computation, we get the following theorem. If you take two objects in the category of filtered topological spaces, x and y, and you take the categorical product filtration, which again in degree n is xn times yn, then the barcode in dimension k of the categorical product filtration can be computed as the union over sort of complementary dimensions of taking an interval from x in degree I, an interval from y in degree j, and intersecting them. Super simple. That's a very satisfying formula for the barcode of x times y. And this is a disjoint union of barcode sets. Okay, so going back to the example of the filtered circle, here is the barcode of K and the barcode of L. And all I'm saying here is that the barcode of the product is obtained by just intersecting intervals from K and L in complementary dimensions. And that's how you go from left to right. This has a very cool corollary, a computational corollary, which says that if you have two finite metric spaces and you compute Rip's persistent homology, then the barcode of x times y with the maximum metric, x times y with the maximum metric, is just the intersection of the barcodes of the Rips from x and the Rips from y. So if you think of this algorithmically, this is a very sort of efficient shortcut to compute barcodes of product spaces if you can break them up into their components. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. So here's the question I was hoping to get. Right. So if we're talking about Kunneth theorems, the question that one should ask is, what about the short exact sequence? That's what's supposed to be a Kunneth theorem. So what do I mean by that? If you're thinking about Kunneth theorems, you're perhaps hoping to see something like this. We're hoping to see the persistent homology of x, the persistent homology of y as ft modules. Maybe they're tensor product over ft, maybe they're tor over ft, and in the middle, something that has to do with the persistent homology of x and of some product of x and y, right? That's what you would hope. And your hopes are correct. And a short exact sequence like that exists by just purely algebraic reasons. So let me tell you how. So again, start with a filtered topological space X, and take the singular chains on each filtration degree n. Okay. So if you take the singular chains and just add them up, take the direct sum over the filtration degrees, you get what is called the persistent chain complex. Okay, the persistent chain complex. So all of these guys are modules, are graded modules over the polynomial ring FT. Excuse me. Okay, great. So not only can you take the direct sum of the singular chains, but you can also take the direct sum of the boundary maps. So when you do that, not only do you get FT morphisms, but you actually get a graded FT morphism, right? So a graded morphism of graded modules over the polynomial ring. So what we're getting in the end is a graded chain complex, a chain complex of graded modules over the polynomial ring FT. And the very simple observation is that if you compute just the standard homology of this chain complex, you recover the persistent homology of X as FT modules, right? So this is an isomorphism of graded FT modules. And the only thing that is being used here is the fact that homology distributes over direct sums. That's the only thing we're using. Okay, so with that sort of very algebraically minded argument, we now know that if you compute the homology of now the tensor product of these two chain complexes, then by the algebraic Kunneth theorem, we have this short exact sequence. You know, that's just the algebraic Kunneth theorem over PIDs, which FT is one of those. And you just have to check that everything respects degrees. So now if you compute the homology of the persistent chains, you get the persistent homology of the filtration. So now we have sort of the type of short exact sequence that you would expect, right? The persistent homology of X, the persistent homology of Y, some sort of tensor product over FT. You have the Tor term over FT as well, but here in the middle, you have this homology of the tensor product of these two chain complexes. And the last step is sort of the following theorem. So this is like a persistent Eilenberg-Zilbert type of theorem we prove. So what we do is we prove that if you look at the following functors, the functor that takes a pair of filtered topological spaces, computes the persistent chain complex of the tensor product of the filtrations, and then computes homology. So that functor is naturally isomorphic to the functor that takes the two filtered spaces, computes their persistent chain complexes, takes the tensor product as chain complexes, and then computes homology. How do you prove this? This is essentially a cyclic model theorem. And what you have to do is you have to show that these two functors satisfy specific properties and that they agree in dimension 0. And you do that by hand once you get there. So putting everything together, you get this very nice theorem that says that the persistent homology of this tensor product filtration, which is the one that was suggested by CW complexes, fits into this short exact sequence of FT modules. And the exact sequence is split exact, but the splitting is not natural. So the corollary we get from here is that if you take the tensor product filtration of two spaces, then you can read off the barcode of the tensor product by taking sort of barcodes from X and Y and shifting them using the left endpoint or the right endpoint of the other interval. In other words, take the interval I from X, shift it by the left endpoint of J. Now do the opposite. Take the left point of I, use that to shift the interval J, take the intersection, and that gives you one interval. The first union is sort of the tensor product version of the Kunneth formula. And the second, where you're using the right endpoints to shift, is the Tor term in the short exact sequence. So again, you get a sort of a very satisfying formula that doesn't seem to be very useful when you look at it, but you will be wrong. There is a recent paper, very, very nice paper by Henry Adams, his former student, Joshua Mirth, who's now a postdoc working with me, And they analyzed the energy landscape of alkanes. So what do they do? So an alkane is a chain, just a long chain of carbon atoms, and you have sort of hydrogens attached to each carbon atom. And what they study is the energy landscape of these molecules. In other words, they select a particular energy function. In their case, the energy function is one that looks like this, is parameterized by the angles between the carbon atoms, and has this sort of very simple additive formula. So the energy landscape now is this sort of, this, let's say, surface or hypersurface. And then what they want to do is they want to understand the sublevel set persistence of that landscape, okay? The sublevel set persistence, and in particular, understand the barcodes that you get by studying the sublevel set filtration, okay? So here's what Joshua and Henry and collaborators prove. So they showed this sort of very, very nice connection between the types of energies that they're looking in this this alkane molecule. So they say, if you have manifold, smooth, compact, closed manifolds, M1 through Mn, and you construct the following smooth function, f, which is going to be the sum of f1 theta 1, fm theta n, then the barcode of the sublevel set filtration of big F is the barcode of the tensor product filtrations of the sublevel sets of each component separately. And then this guy here in the bottom right can be studied using our Kunneth formula for the tensor product filtration. And that's exactly what they do. So they're able to derive formulas for molecules like pentane by applying the persistent Kunneth theorem to simpler molecules. So for example, here they show how, for example, the Tor part appears in their expression of the sublevel set persistence of pentane from the persistent homology of butane. So to finish, going back to time series analysis, right? This was the thing that motivated the entire enterprise. So going back to quasi-periodic functions. So once we have these persistent Kunneth formulas, we can go back to, sliding window point clouds of quasi-periodic functions, which are tori, and we can use the persistent Kunneth theorems to derive bounds on persistence. So what are the types of theorems we can prove? So suppose that you order the Fourier coefficients of the quasi-periodic function by magnitude, and you choose sort of n of them, which are linearly independent over Q, sort of the sort of indexing case are linearly independent. Then what we can prove is that you have at least n choose j toroidal features in the persistence diagram, whose persistence has to be at least this quantity. So what we're saying is that you have, as many persistence features as you expect to see in a torus, and we're telling you at least what is the persistence that you should expect. So the persistence is going to be controlled by something in terms of the Fourier coefficients of the original function. It's going to be controlled by the smallest singular value of the van der Monde matrix I showed you before. And it's going to be controlled by how well the sort of trigonometric series is approximating your function, and the sliding window dimension as well. So the last example, here is a quasi-periodic function with two frequencies. So you should expect a two-dimensional torus. When you compute homology, persistent homology in dimension 1 and dimension 2, you get two classes in dimension 1, one class in dimension 2, and then these dashed lines are exactly the bounds on persistence we expect to see from the theorem. So our hope is that one can use these types of bounds to separate noise from features in applications and actually say, here's where we expect to see strong features. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Let's thank Jose for the Zoom method you prefer. And we will open up the floor for some questions.
Hi, Jose. This is excellent work. Thank you so much. I'm very excited about this. I'm sort of like, it seems to me, can you sort of just sharpen my intuition here? It seems to me that the Kunneth case, what do you have? You sort of have shown that you can do maybe all of it on the nose with just homology. And the way persistence comes back is because you want to be able to push back through your RIPS metric and relate that back into your homology. Is that a good intuition?
Yeah, so let me
that diagram would be very nice, because you get all these diagrams with these really aligned barcodes, yeah, which to me means, oh yeah, you just got the homology. This is not really a persistence thing we're doing here.
No, this is persistent. Yeah. This is exactly persistent homology. So let me perhaps elaborate on what this means. So if you forget the P, so what P is doing here is saying I'm taking persistent homology of the filtration. So what does that mean? I'm taking, you have your filtration, and then for each degree you compute homology in dimension K. Okay.
Right.
I'll take the direct sum of all of those homologies across all the filtration, and you get a single direct sum of homologies. That's what pH is.
Right. So no, I understand those aspects. Yeah.
But the main point is that, when you look at this pH as an FT module, that is the invariant factors are the barcode.
Right.
The invariant factors are the barcode. And what this Kunneth theorem is telling you is that you can get the barcode of this from different manipulations of the barcodes of the terms. But it's not something that you can read off from the homology at each degree, separately, because the module structure of FT is sort of combining homology from different filtration degrees. I don't know if that clarifies or confuses things.
Maybe I have two things mixed in my confusion. So you had this diagram where you get these really neatly aligned births of barcodes once you do your Kunneth type.
So maybe let's perhaps go. You mean this?
Yeah, that, and actually also in the case of the alleles or whatever that was, the biological case, all of these get this really nicely aligned barcode.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right?
You mean this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So the thing that happens, and perhaps the better example is this one, is that they are aligned because they are intersections of similar bars, right? So again, the way to get the ones in pentane is by intersecting I's with J's, either on the nose or translated by the endpoints of I and J, and the Kunneth formula tells you which ones to take.
Right.
So the alignment is sort of I would say an artifact of the formulas, but the formulas, you have to derive them from the sort of algebraic nonsense that is in the back.
I would love to talk more to you about this, but because I may be wrong, but my intuition is that it's not, just to call it an artifact is almost being too weak about it. It's actually better.
Okay.
But I may be wrong. You have thought about this way more than I have. But I would love to talk to you about this work. It's excellent work. And so, just to give you a quick intuition, what I care about understanding projections, right? And when you take this complex case and you have these nice products, really what you have is very nice projections on your space.
Correct.
So even though in each projection you only have a subset of your points, you end up getting in some cases, you can show that you get everything. You get all the information that you can have that were on that original topology. And so those are cases where we can do the best case, and maybe we can study different projections, how much information are we losing, and so forth. And so your Kunneth thing is sort of a way into understanding this, because you start thinking of things in good projections and putting your homology together that way. And so that's why I'm so excited, because it's sort of, I'm going the inverse direction, but you basically solve the big piece of that problem.
Yeah, no. So something we did. I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it right on the head. One of the main reasons why we wanted to get these Kunneth formulas written down was, on the one hand, to understand quasi-periodic functions, but also to get better algorithms at the time of computing persistent homology, because you get these, for you to detect quasi-periodicity, you need a lot of points on your torus. So what we proposed in the Kunneth paper was doing essentially what you said, taking projections, computing persistence on each dimension separately, and then using Kunneth to reassemble everything. The quasi-periodic point cloud is not necessarily a product, but the two are interleaved.
Okay.
So one, yeah, I would love to talk more about that.
I can think of very interesting experiments to run that would help us really tease out what happens with these products. But anyway, we should definitely talk more. Thank you so much. Very, very nice work.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, there's a question in the chat from Sarah who asks, have the bounds for noise that you were describing at the end been used in any applications?
No. Again, this is something the bounds we put at the end, we put them on the archive a month ago. so no. If you have any ideas, we would love to hear them.
Hi, Jose. Really enjoyed your talk. Can I say something? I think this implies, like, if I do the sliding window embedding, but I equip my points in Rn with the L infinity measure, then the Kunneth formula says that I can just project a coordinates, compute homology, and then gather everything.
That it wouldn't give you the original one, because the original one is not necessarily a Cartesian product. But the thing that you would get back through the process you described will be close to the right answer. And one can actually derive, like bounds and how, as to how far you are. But you're correct. Taking, the sliding window point cloud. I guess the difficulty is that if you think of it, let's say in the flat torus, the irrational winding is something that goes, through a line of irrational slope around the torus. So it's this diagonal thing. So if you put points on it, the point cloud you get is not a grid. It's not a product of things in one axis with things in the other axis.
Right. I was just thinking about them embedded Rn with the infinity norm. And that.
No, but it's the same thing. But it's the same thing you're saying, and the two things will be close, and one can actually estimate how far they are.
Which is
which is great, computationally speaking.
Is how far off you can be in your metrics when you reglue.
Sorry, say that again?
Is that part of the bounds? Is how much you lose in reconstructing this?
Not in this paper, but it was in the original Kunneth paper.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe I have a question regarding this discussion.
Yeah, Luis, go ahead.
Would you be able to have like a similar Kunneth formula, but for a Euclidean product?
L2 metric?
Right.
Unlikely. The reason why I say that is because there is a Kunneth formula for the L1 metric. That's work of Gunnar Carlson and one of his students. And they can only show that it holds for homological dimensions 0 and 1. So they have a Kunneth formula.
When you say L1, I'm thinking
here's what I mean. I mean, take two metric spaces. When you take the product, you have several choices on the metric you're going to put on the product. You can put the L infinity distance, which is the one we're using, the maximum metric, or you can put like an L1, which is the sum, or an L2, which is the square root of the square root of the sum of the squares.
Right.
The Kunneth formula we have is for the L infinity case, and it works in all homological dimensions.
Right.
The case of L1, meaning the sum of the distances, is what Gunnar and his student did, and it only works in homological dimensions 0 and 1.
Right.
That's all the Kunneth formula mileage they get for that distance. So my suspicion is that the theorems for other types of metrics, like an L2 metric, are not as nice, because the Rips complex doesn't behave nicely in that case, at least.
But I thought this is my confusion. I thought your tensor product corresponded to the sum metric.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not directly, but yeah, it is the maximum metric, the maximum metric is the one that came up in the categorical product.
Right.
Okay. The CW complex, where you take the sum, is the one that came up in the tensor product filtration, and that's the recorded theorem. The L1 metric should be related to the tensor product, but we have not observed that case. We have not analyzed that case. How the sum corresponds to the tensor product.
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe I'm confused, but I think that should be the case. I think.
Yeah. I think you're right. But that's not. But we didn't go down that route.
Right. Okay. So maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah. So Henry Adams has a comment.
Yeah, just that. You know, the torus with the L infinity metric, you know, we know it's Viator-Schripp's complexes, but with the L2 metric, that's still unknown. But, you know, I think folks, including me, would be super interested in any progress.
You mean the torus embedded in R4 as like a product of circles, or in R3?
L4, or R4. You know, or just take the geodesic metric on the circle, but then combine two geodesic metrics in an L2 way. The flat torus, I guess.
Right.
Okay, if we have a little bit of a natural lull in our questions, let's thank the speaker again.